All right, so for this game, we have what is a sequencing game, right? So we have essentially 8 positions and 8 flowers to place into those positions. Nothing especially too out of the ordinary, although it is worth noting we have seemingly quite a few spaces to work with, more than the usual, but nothing outside of that. This is still effectively just a sequencing game. So we have the 8 positions. The flowers themselves are, we have L, M, we have O, R, S, and then T, V, and Z. Next, the rules. So the first rule tells us that S has to go at some point before the O, so we can line that up. S is before O. Next, we're told O has to go before O has to go before R, V, and Z. Now, we can latch it on to this rule over here, of course, just because we already have an O there. So we can say this O is going to go before all 3 of these guys, before the R, before the V, and before the Z. Next, we are told that Z has to go before L, so that's kind of nice. We can latch it onto here. Z is before the L. Next, we are told that T has to go before both L and M. So again, we can latch it onto this rule here, and we can say that T is going to go before the L, and T is going to go before M as well. So it's worth noting we have a pretty nice elastic band setup here. All the elements rather are accounted for, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So everybody is here. From here, though, I mean, we can't do anything definitive. So we might want to jump into the questions. Actually, before we do, we can take one extra step here, which is to say that, I mean, in these situations, it's always a good idea to take a look at the first and the last positions. 90% of what you need is really built into this web of connections, but the first and the last positions are still worth kind of highlighting. It's worth noting, so the first person really can only be either S or T. Everybody else has to go after somebody, so we can latch that on. And on the other end, it's worth noting that the last person, well, we have a little bit of flexibility here. Essentially, the last person can be one of R or V or L or M. So we have a little bit of movement here. To be honest, 4 people is probably not worth it. If you really wanted to, you can put this in R, V, L, or M, but I mean, that's literally half of your element, so that's not going to do much. The fact that there's only 2 people that can go first, though, is a lot more significant. Anyways, from there, I guess we can jump into the questions themselves. So the first question here is not an exclusion question. Really, this is just a global question, but you still want to do this question first, just because the first question really just, plays on your understanding of the game. So the question here asks, which of the following cannot be one of the first 4 flowers shipped? So the question essentially is who cannot go into one of these first 4 positions. Now, if there's somebody that wouldn't be able to go into one of the first 4 positions, chances are it's going to be somebody that basically has a lot of people before them, right? So essentially we kind of want to look at the tail end over here. Now, R only has 2 people before him, so that seems very plausible. V has 2 people before him, so that doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with V going into the first 4. L has to have 1, 2, 3, but also T as well, which actually makes L a pretty viable contender for an answer, right? Because L has to have 4 people before him. There's the Z, there's the T, and by extension O and S, all of which have to go before the L, which means there's our answer. L definitely cannot go into the first 4 positions. Best answer to question number 1 then is A. Next. So I guess let's take a look at the locals. The first local question here is number 2, which says, if the tulips are 6th, then what would have to happen? Well, let's take a look. If we put the tulips into 6th, the question is, what does that tell us? What does that mean? Well, we definitely know that after the tulips, we're going to have both L and M, which means we don't exactly know the exact order, but these 2 positions are going to be locked out. So we can kind of leave these as L/M. We just don't quite know who is who. Beyond that, though, we also know that T was actually one of the very few people that ever could have gone first, right? Which means now that T is not in the first position, it now forces S to be the only other person who can go first, which means S has to go first. And you'll notice that as far as the rest of the elements are concerned, I mean, we really just have O and then R, V, and Z, except O happens to be before all of them, which means right now O is going to be stuck in the second position, and then R, V, and Z are just going to shuffle between 3, 4, and 5. So the question now asks which of the following must be true. A, the orchids are second? Well, actually, yes, the orchids do have to go second. Best answer to number 2 is also A. Next, let's take a look at question 3. If the orchids are fourth, then, well, let's see what we can do with that information. If the orchids are fourth, the question as usual is what does that mean for us? What does that tell us? Now, before the orchids, we had to have S, which, to be fair, we have plenty of room to maneuver. But after the orchids, we have to have R, V, Z, and L as well, which conveniently, we only have 4 spaces to work with here. Now, we don't exactly know who's going to be who, but it's worth recognizing that these 4 elements, R, V, Z, and L, are basically going to lock out these 4 positions. So you can kind of keep that in your head, or you can just put it down on paper. So we can say we're going to basically have to have R slash V slash, and over here, we do know that Z and L have an internal relationship where Z has to go before L. So if you want to highlight that, we can kind of say R slash V slash Z before L in some capacity, which kind of leaves us on the other side with who? We basically have to have S, T, and M into the first 3 positions. So if you wanted to, you can do something similar. We're going to have S slash T before M. So the question itself now asks, each of the following could be true except, so what cannot possibly happen? A, T is second. Well, I mean, T could go second here. You could have T, M, and then S would go first. Could we have the sunflowers third? And yes, sunflowers are actually pretty flexible here, so there's no reason why they couldn't be third. The lilies are fifth. Could we have L and 5? Well, actually no. So we know that L has to go after the Z, which means that there's no way to place the L in 5 because then there is no space for the Z to go prior. So the best answer to question number 3 then becomes C. Next, number 4 is global. We're going to come back to that one in just a moment. Let's take a look at question number 5. So 5 says, if zinnias are 7th, so if we have to have Z in 7, I guess the question now becomes, what does that tell us as usual? Well, first of all, we already know that L is going to have to follow immediately thereafter. So that's a good start. From here, though, it's kind of worth recognizing that we have quite a bit of flexibility, right? Because we know that, for example, T and M will have to go in that relative order, but they have no other restrictions on themselves otherwise, right? So arguably, they could shift almost anywhere between 1 through 6. It actually looks like from this point forward, we don't know as much, but let's see what we can do with what we have available to us. The question is, what must be false? Or in other words, what cannot possibly happen? Answer choice A, M in 2. Well, I mean, arguably, the only restriction on M is that it's after T, which is very plausible to have M in 2 and then T could go first. So that seems like it could happen. Next, answer choice B, the sunflowers are third. Could we have S in 3? Well, after the S, we're going to have to accommodate O, R, V, and, well, actually just that, because Z and L are already taken care of. So really, after the S, we just have to have O, R, and V. Now, if we place S into third, we do arguably have the room for O, R, and V to go into 4, 5, 6. So that seems like it could work. Answer choice C, violets are fourth. Could we have V in 4? Well, I mean, V just has to have 2 people before him, right? Which means there's seemingly nothing wrong with having V4. Answer choice D, the roses are fifth. Could we have R in 5? Same thing. R only has to have 2 people before him and otherwise is unrestricted. So that seems very plausible. Answer choice E, the tulips are 6. Could we have T in 6? Well, no, that's not going to fly because we know that after the tulips, we're going to have M, which means if we place the T in 6, there is no room for M and that's going to break. So the best answer to question number 5 then is E. Next, number 6. If Z are third, well, once again, let's see what we can do with that information. So if we have to have Z in 3, I guess the question becomes, what does that tell us? Well, first of all, we definitely know that before the Z, we have to have both O and S, respectively. So we can plug them into place. Now, outside of that, though, it seems like we're pretty flexible, especially because R and V at this point, as long as they're after S and O, which they would have to be no matter what, are quite flexible, right? They can move around quite a bit, which means they can pretty much shuffle everybody back and forth between positions 4 through 8. So from here, it doesn't look like we can do much more, but let's see what we can do with the question. The question itself asks, how many of the 8 flowers are there that could go fourth? Well, in the fourth positions, I guess we can actually just do this one by one. Let's take a look. At this point, we said R and V are almost completely flexible, so R and V easily could go fourth. So we'll just leave little check marks up here for R and V. Next, of the remaining elements, who else do we have to work with? Well, we just have T, L, and M. Now, T also looks pretty safe, right? Because for T to go fourth, it just has to have a bunch of people after him. So it doesn't seem like there's any reason that T couldn't go fourth. L and M, however, wouldn't really work because L and M have to both go after the T, which means that there's no way to put them into the fourth position at the moment, which means really the only people that right now could go fourth are R, T, and V. So the best answer to question number 6 then becomes 3, or in other words, answer choice B. Lastly, let's bounce back to the global question. How many of the 8 kinds of flowers are there that could go second? So I guess we'll, up here, we're going to erase these. Now, the question is how many people could go second? Well, first of all, let's use our history. We definitely know that O could have gone second. And in this scenario, we could have easily had S go into second, or T, or M, right? Because you could have had T2, M3, or you could have had T1, M2, or you could have had the S kind of splitting them up. So we could easily have at least, it looks like 4 different elements. In fact, let's kind of leave check marks here. We know that S, T, M, as well as O could have gone second. So now the question is there anybody else that could have gone second? Well, let's see what we have available to us. R and V, well, they both have to go after S and O, which means that there's no real way to place either R or V into the second position. And then we have L and Z. Well, L is definitely out of the question. In fact, so is Z, because Z has to go after S and O as well, which means that we can disqualify both of those as well from our options, which means there are 4 people that could potentially go second in this game. The best answer to question number 4 is B.